This one. It's not very big. Wait. Well, that lure just fell right out of his mouth. Another nice one. This one's fat. Look, nice purple color on it. They are fun to catch. Sea lice on all these fish still, so they're relatively new to the river. So one of the reasons that these spots will just all of a sudden turn on like this one has been, is going to be the time of the tide. It's not so much, I say time. Time is probably not the greatest choice of words for a description. It's period of the tide, height of the tide. It's how much water is over some of these spots. Sometimes you have too much water, sometimes there's not enough water over them. When you get these abrupt humps, that, like we're fishing now, all this structure that rises up from 30 feet to 20 feet or 15 feet, well, the farther the tide drops, it goes up and down 6 to 8 feet up in the area that we're fishing. There's something about the flow based on the amount of water that's coming over these pieces of structure that we're fishing that draws these fish in, or it draws the bait in, which draws the fish in. So there's going to be a certain point in the tide, a certain amount of water that flows over it. Another thing to remember is that the difference between incoming and outgoing. A lot of these places that produce on an outgoing tide won't produce on an incoming tide. And that's because of the flow, the amount of flow, the direction of the flow. In order for a particular piece of structure to hold fish on both tides, the current would have to flow in the opposite direction from the exact same direction, and that piece of structure would have to be the exact same shape in order to reproduce the flow that it gets on one tide or the other. So if it's good on the outgoing tide, in order for it to be good on the incoming, the flow would have to be exactly the same, which is never the case. There's no rocks with the two sides are the same or humps with two sides are the same. So that's why one spot will be good on an outgoing tide and not good on an incoming tide. Typically, I can't really think of any spots that I know that produce as well on an incoming as they do on an outgoing, or as good on an outgoing as they do on an incoming. But you want to either keep a mental log, or I keep photo logs. I take photos during every trip. I log them into my computer. I organize them by day so I can look back through photos and see what I caught on a particular day. And the photos will all be time stamped so I can see what time. I can go back and look at the tide if I want. That's going to help me determine which spots are better at a particular time of day, particular time of tide, particular depth of water maybe. And we got a lot of birds here, so I'm going to stop talking and go catch a fish. But pay attention to the time of the tide, or the period of the tide, to best locate fish on a more consistent basis. So there's a lot of different lures that you can use out here to catch these striped bass. Everybody has a favorite lure. One of my favorite lures is a paddle tail shad. I like a 6-inch paddle tail shad. These are shad bodies on a lead jig head. One of the really simple, really popular are the Storm Wildeye swim shads. They have a really big paddle tail. They have a nice body, so they have a big profile. They displace a lot of water. They make a lot of vibration, and the tail section is really thin, so that tail really vibrates. These are pre-weighted. They're 7/8 of an ounce, these 6-inch ones. This is for the money. These are easy. They last. They hold up really well. They last for a long time and catch a lot of fish on one lure. They don't tear up as much as a shad body does. And we're casting, retrieving, ripping them, and as you can see, vertical jigging them. Other times, when these fish are on mackerel, or if they're holding tight on structure, deeper structure, and you want to upsize, you can go up to these Daddy Mac Trophy 3.5s. Not sure just what went flying just then, but oh, there's a hook. 3.5s, this 3.5 ounce lead spoon, basically it's just a giant spoon jigging. You can cast them and retrieve them. You can vertical jig them. If these fish are on mackerel or sand eels, these are really good. You can get them in squid, pink, when they're keyed in on squid like they are now. A pink one might work well for us. Bucktails are a pretty popular go-to for a lot of guys. You can vertical jig a bucktail. We may try that on one drift over this hump just to see if we can pick a fish or two off of just a plain bucktail. You can tip these with plastics if you want, otter tails, things like that. And then the Daddy Mac Elite Deluxe. This is a 2.8 ounce. These work really well for sea bass, but catch a lot of stripers on them too, especially if they're keyed in on sand eels. These work really well. Those are just a few of the lures that I use when we're out here fishing in this heavy current. The biggest thing is, this is on a 1/2 ounce jig head. If the current's really ripping, you can go up to a 3/4 ounce jig head or even a 1 ounce jig head to really get your lure down there if you need to. I may even try upsizing to a 3/4 ounce, knowing that these fish seem to be holding on this structure, and see what a little bit heavier presentation does. So like I said, these fish, the bigger fish are going to be below the smaller fish. So if there's a school that moves in here, to get down through them faster, I may increase the size of my jig head that I use on this shad, or go to something heavier that gets down through those smaller fish quicker. Hi, I'm Tim Moore from Tim Moore Outdoors, New Hampshire's premier kayak fishing guide service. If you want to fish in some of the most beautiful surroundings, have the opportunity to catch the fish of a lifetime, and use some of the finest equipment on the market, give us a call. We'd love to take you fishing. Got the fish holding in a little trough right here. Just going to let this heavier shad sink. This one. Just vertical jigging that shad, just letting it swim in the current, just drifting. That's all I did. Pump it every now and again to get the paddle to move. And these fish are coming off the structure. They're holding tight to it, but they're coming off it to feed on these shads. That's where you're going to get your better fish. Those are the ones that they're just going to opportunistically feed. When something comes by, they're going to come off that structure and eat it. And you might be able to pull several fish off the same rock hump or whatever several times, as long as you don't keep running over it with the boat. Well, these aren't giant fish, but when you're inundated with 15-inch micro schoolies, and you can consistently catch 26 to 28 inchers, you're doing something right. That's a healthy looking fish right there. It's got some shoulders. Good sized fish. We marked a bunch. We're going to make that drift again. I'm going to let this one go. There's one. Oh, hey. This feels like a much better fish. Just drifted over this 19-foot hump. Just letting the shad swim. He's still down there a ways. Get down in this current. I feel like they're 100 pounds. Come on, which way are you gonna go? Hefty. One of the better fish of the day. Solid, he's fat. It's nice. Wasn't in danger of losing him. Nice fat one. He's hefty. I love striped bass fishing. Covered with sea lice. These are new fish that are just coming in, which is great. It's early July. It's just after the 4th of July weekend. And we've got new fish still coming in, which means July and August fishing is just going to be phenomenal. That's great. I bet there's some much bigger fish coming in behind them too. That's usually the case.
What you want? Come on.